What's up, Black Ops Militia members? Hope you are doing great. Super excited to be diving into this particular resource. I'll tell you, every single thing that I have in the arsenal is something that I'm excited to share. But this one probably takes the cake. It's definitely top three for some of my favorites. Reasons being number one, the amount of leverage that this produces in a business is insane, especially given like how simple it is to set up. And number two, this is probably one of the most used resources that I have, most used frameworks and approaches that I implement in the businesses that I work with. And one of the reasons for that is because across every company that I've worked with, whether they're at 6 or 7 figures, one of the main bottlenecks that they have, one of the main points that they get wrong or that they have to optimize around is onboarding, right? And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first is that onboarding is not just about getting someone in the door. The expectations that you set or don't set during the onboarding process really set the tone for the rest of the engagement, the rest of the project and the relationship. And then number two, onboarding is something that can be a huge bottleneck to actually scaling on the sales side, right? Oftentimes, onboarding is one of those processes that is a little bit more nuanced because it's getting a lot of info about the client, and not everybody in the business is always best equipped to do that. And so this can really be a bottleneck for bringing new people in the door. And I've worked with multiple businesses where that was one of their primary bottlenecks. And so what this approach does, right, it really looks to touch on three main things that help to alleviate those things and create a huge amount of leverage, right? So like I mentioned, removing those bottlenecks to scale, avoiding misaligned clients, right? Because when you're able to consistently set the same expectation, right, either your clients are on the same page, and so things that would have upset them no longer upset them because they had that expectation when they wouldn't have before, or they are able to be vocal about the things that maybe are the reason that they are misaligned, and you can make a decision early on to explore ending the engagement, right? But then top thing, which is golden goose egg, which is less labor, more excellence, right? There's a lot of steps depending on the nature of your service that can go into onboarding, a lot of things that need to be done, most of them administrative. And we're able to reduce the amount of money, time, effort, energy that goes towards making those things happen from a labor perspective, but not only maintain the same standard, but actually increase the standard of excellence by creating a really seamless onboarding process for every single client, regardless of your employee capacity or feelings. It's just going to work, right? So I'm going to dive in and just first start looking at like, what does a typical onboarding process look like, right? I'm going to be referencing a particular service industry. We're going to assume a couple of things here, but you can really apply this to whatever your onboarding process looks like or whatever the onboarding process looks like for a company that you are working to implement this with. So this is all going to kick off with whatever the new client onboarding trigger point is. I've seen some instances where onboarding begins when the client fills out an onboarding form. I've seen some where the onboarding process begins when a pipeline stage changes or when the payment actually gets received or when the contract actually gets signed, right? Whatever that trigger point is going to be for you, right? That is going to be what leads to a new client that actually needs to go ahead and get onboarded, right? As far as what this should be, I really can't make recommendations. I've seen different iterations of this work better for different businesses. A lot of it depends on their tech stack and, of course, the nature of the service that they are providing. But you'll want to identify which of these is going to be the best starting point, the best trigger point for an onboarding process based on your business or the one that you're looking at. Once we have that trigger and we have this new client, typical flow might look like alerting the team, right? Everything that we have here in yellow is going to be things that you're doing manually, right? So alerting the team, right? You might be sending a message in the Slack channel, sending an email, whatever that might be. And when I say things that you're doing manually, right, these are going to be things that you actually have to input, right? So even if it is an automation that you have, maybe you have, whenever a new onboarding form gets set up, gets filled out, you have Calendly send you a text or something like that. But regardless, like this is going to be something that you are going to need to take action on as a business, as an organization, as a system, right? Next up, we've got creating Slack channels, right? Again, if you're using Slack as your main communication point, this would be a good example. You might be sending an email or whatever that might look like. But you want to start getting your new clients set up into all of your ecosystem. So creating new Slack channels, inviting them to new Slack channels. Something I see a lot with Slack is having to follow up with the client to actually join the Slack channel and invite anyone else that needs to be in the Slack channel. I work with a lot of creative agencies that do video. So you need to create folders and like the folder structure for them. And then ideally, right, you should be using a project management software. So you'll probably need to add into that project management software, create their client folder, their list, whatever that might look like. Now, this is going to be something that the client needs to do as well, right? Anything in red. So whatever that next step is, again, it could be actually booking the onboarding call. It could be completing their onboarding form or something in between, whatever that looks like for you, right? Paying the invoice. The client needs to actually take action on this step here. And until they do, you kind of got to follow up with them until you can move to that onboarding call or the next steps, right? And there's nothing wrong with this onboarding flow, right? The only thing that is a bit problematic here or that can be optimized is really going to be the amount of labor, number one, that it takes to make all of this happen. But number two, all of this in yellow is information, and it's information that we lose as soon as we go through and create these assets. So what I mean by that is, even though we have these Slack channels get created, we have these media folders get created, and we have this folder or list in the project management software actually get created, we don't reference those things again unless a human being references those. So if we need to go and upload something to this client's media folders, right, that's really something that you're going to have to do manually. If you need to check and see what the status of something in their project management software is, someone on your team is going to need to go in and make that update and then probably come back to Slack and drop that update for you or for the client, right? But all of this data, right, because it is data, we can actually really leverage it to automate a lot of these processes, and it can be a lot more than you think, right? And the way that we're going to do that is by leveraging one simple tool, and it's called a lookup table, okay? Lookup table is literally just and oftentimes I'll build these into Google Sheets. I've also built them into Airtable, right? You're going to want to build this into a platform that is meant to handle numerical data, not just numerical data, but a spreadsheet style platform, right? So you're also going to want that to be hosted online and to integrate with automation tools. But once you have this lookup table, this really just becomes the database of all of this information that we create as part of the client onboarding. So if you're using Slack, right, channel IDs, internal channel, external channel, right, separating every ID for every channel that is related to this client, folder IDs for any Drive or Dropbox folders that we're creating, right? If you're making a folder or a list in ClickUp or whatever project management that you're using, we're going to want to get that into the lookup table, right? And then we have the customer ID and record. This is going to be all of the information about the customer. What is their email, right? What is their time zone? What is their location? All of these things are going to go into the lookup table. Now, what this is going to do, what this lookup table becomes, is kind of like the memory of your entire business. It no longer needs to be the memory. You no longer need to rely on the memory of your team members, right? You can now have all of that information, all of those memories stored in a place that can be referenced down the line. And that opens up the door for some pretty cool things. So I want to give you an example just to walk through conceptually what that could look like. And then I actually want to take you through one of my flows that I've built out that leverages a lookup table for some really great results. So in this example, right, we have a new client that comes in, right? We change their pipeline stage or whatever that is. We are keeping track of it in our CRM. And as soon as a new client comes in, again, their information is going to get added into this lookup table. Their email address, their name, their company name, their website, all of these various different elements will get added in, right? Let's say we create a new Drive folder, which again, that can be automated. Because it is automated, we're able to actually automatically add the folder ID into that lookup table as well, right? We've got a couple of things that need to happen to support fulfillment. Let's say we create a new project management folder, Slack channels, those get added in. And now at some point, maybe it's because we stopped working with this client because the project wrapped up or because they didn't want to continue with us, right? let's say this is a month later, months later, it's time to actually offboard that client, right? Because we have all of this information in a lookup table, it is very easy to automate almost the entirety of their offboarding process. So whenever we do trigger their offboarding, more often than not, that's going to be changing the status in the project management or within the CRM. We're going to look up all of this information within the lookup table, right? And that again is going to be an automation. And all of the contents of that lookup table are going to come into this process. They're going to empower the automations around this process. So because we know what drive folder is for this particular client, we can automatically move it into a offboarded folder list, right? Or an offboarded client folder. We could archive or move that PM folder. We can send the client a message in their specific Slack channel. Hey, we started your offboarding process. Go ahead and book your offboarding call here, or whatever your standard procedure is for offboarding a client. You can start to send that message in Slack automatically. You can archive a Slack channel. So if there's an internal channel that you have set up for this client, you can put it on a schedule. We have it in one of the businesses that I implemented this in for 7 days after we changed their status to offboarding. It will archive their internal and external Slack channels, right? And then you can create any particular offboarding task in the client's project management folder or list, right? And that is just a drop in the bucket of some of the things that you can do. So the real value here is now these things that you had to do manually because only a human being had the information around what ID or what folder or what channel went for this particular client. Now you can rely on automations and machines to really do that for you. And you can start to see how that can remove a bottleneck to scaling, right? So this is kind of like the concept, but I want to dive into an actual Zap to show you what this looks like in practice. So this is an actual live Zap that I have within one of the businesses that I'm working with. And this is their onboarding Zap, right? So pretty much everything that comes into the client onboarding process is created and supported through this Zap. So I want to walk you through it so you can see exactly how this approach supports things that couldn't happen otherwise. So whenever a new task comes into ClickUp, right, this is created whenever we sign a new client. It's going to send a message to the internal team in Slack, just letting them know that we have a new client, and it's going to create the client's folder in ClickUp. It's also going to create all of their Slack channels and all of their Google Drive folders. And then it is going to right here create that that lookup table, right? And so basically every single ID, every identifying piece of information about every single one of these channels is just getting added as a new spreadsheet row into Google Sheets. So every row is a client, every column is the various different assets that we need and that we are creating as part of the onboarding process, right? And so this is where it really starts to get fun. We wait a day, and this is a subzap that actually checks to see if the client joined Slack, right? And this is where the lookup table gets used for the very first time. So within this subzap, what it's checking for is it's looking for this client, right? So it finds their name in the lookup table, and then it finds their email that's associated with their name. And it then looks for the list of users within our Slack channel, within our Slack workspace. And if it does not find a user of that email, right, it returns a no response here, right? If it does find that email, then it returns a yes. So if the client has not joined Slack, then what we'll do is go ahead and follow up with them via email. And if they have joined Slack, then what we'll do is wait a day, and the first message that goes out in Slack is containing a link to their onboarding form, which is hosted in Typeform. So after a day, we check in and see if we can find a response in Typeform that has the same email as the one that we saw when we created that task, right? And so if we do not see that, then we'll go ahead and send them a message in Slack. And if we do see that, then we will thank them for completing the onboarding form. And at the end of their onboarding form, that's where we see, that's where we have a link for them to actually book their onboarding call. So this thanks them for getting their onboarding form complete. And it's lets them know that we're excited for their actual onboarding call, right? A couple of things that I want to call out here, because these are pretty common questions that I get. Just because these messages in Slack are automated does not mean that they look automated, right? So you can choose whenever you're automating messages in Slack if you want it to be coming from a bot and you can very clearly see that it's a bot, or if you want it to come from an account. And when it's coming from an account, it really looks like whoever that account in Slack is, it looks like they sent the message, right? So that's one thing that people ask about a lot, right? But basically, the big picture here is every single thing that we create and add as an asset gets added into this lookup table. And so, on top of being able to check and follow up with various things based on the information that we're storing in that lookup table, we're also able to automate a lot of the things that happen after onboarding. So, for example, during the fulfillment process, if there are things in our project management software that we know are going to be on the client, right? You can set it up to where anytime a task start date arrives, as an example, and it is assigned to a client, it will find the relevant Slack channel for that particular client by looking up in the lookup table what that folder was within the project manager, within the project management system. So let's say we had a task and ClickUp, start date arrives, right? Whenever that arrives, it'll look up the row in the lookup table that contains the folder ID that that task is in. And then it can find the email or the Slack channel ID associated with that row, and it can send a message in that individual Slack channel, right? So that's actually something that we have set up for another company that I work with for internal task start and due date notifications, to where anytime a start date arrives or due date arrives for a task, it will go to that client's internal channel and drop a message for the channel about what that task is, right? And then it has a link to the ClickUp task. So there's a lot that you can do here. But even the things like this is a very foundational thing. And the reason I say it's foundational is because once you lay a good foundation down, you kind of have some liberties around what the house you build looks like, right? And in that same way, as long as you have every single asset that you are creating for a client during the onboarding process get added into a lookup table, right? The amount of flexibility that you have to create additional automations or even make adjustments if you change things around is massive. So there's not a single online service-based business in the world that shouldn't be using a lookup table. Most just don't really know what it is or how it can impact their business. Okay. So this is one of the very easy things that you can start to implement. I'll give you actually one other example of some of the leverage and massive difference that this can make in a business. One of the companies that I'm working with, they have a lot of trouble with tracking whether or not the payment has been received for every month of service that they provide. All right. And so we were able to put an automation in place that anytime a new invoice comes in via Stripe, it looks up the email address that was paid or that was used when the invoice was paid. It looks that up within this client's lookup table, and then it is able to find that client's folder ID where we keep track of all of their payments, and it is able to update a record regarding their payment status, right? So whether or not the payment came through, whether or not the status was failed, and then it sends a message in a Slack channel as well with that information. So it gives us additional data points around payments and incoming revenue, but it also alerts the team. And it would not be able to do that if it was not for a lookup table that it could cross-reference against that email, so it could find all of these other assets, internal Slack channels, ClickUp folder IDs, etc. That is the kind of thing that might take an hour, might take 30 minutes for a project manager. But in the case of this client, right, they have over 70 clients. So let's say that's 30 minutes across 70 clients, and this is something that needs to happen every month, right? You're looking at about 420 hours throughout the span of a year that is going to be spent just on checking the billing, right? Just on checking to make sure that we have accurate tracking of the billing information for a client, or rather their payment status. Let's say that you are paying your PMs, $20 an hour. At 420 hours a year, that's $8,400 in the span of a year in labor that you no longer have to pay, That would not be possible without having this foundational step of a lookup table. Okay. So this is something that you absolutely should be implementing in your business. And it's also a really easy way to create additional value in a business that you are working with to optimize their operations. Again, it's really easy for you to justify $1,000 worth of, or thousands of dollars worth of process optimization and systems optimization when you're able to show very clearly and very tangibly the amount of labor that this can save in cost, right? So I hope this has been helpful. Whatever questions it is that you have about lookup tables, or if there's a situation where you think that you might be able to leverage a lookup table, but you're not entirely sure how, definitely feel free to discuss in the group. I will do my best to support as well. And if you have anything creative, whatever creative solutions that you have that build on top of a lookup table, definitely share those as well, because that would absolutely make our day here in the group. Appreciate you, Black Ops Militia members, and let's keep winning.